BYB Extreme Bare Knuckle Fighting Series brings BYB 11, the Brawl in Doral, Saturday, August 27th at Trump National Doral. That's in Miami. And this is a very cool event. A lot of good fighting, a lot of good action. And for any fans out there that are into this or want to check it out and see what it's all about, you can buy tickets at bybtickets.com. And right now, I've got CEO Mike Vazquez along with the man, Nelson Sweglar, who, gosh, going back to the early days of WWF and WrestleMania, he was integral in that as an executive producer, a lot of their TV programming and all, so he's a part of this as well. Glad to have you both here. I just want to start off first with Mike. Mike, tell us a little bit more about this action-packed event.
Well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's a bare knuckle fight in a triangle ring that we've patented. It's the smallest ring in combat sports with 360-degree corners. So the corners actually force the action, and we end up with over a 90% knockout rate. So we like to say we keep the results in the hands of the fighters and not the judges.
That is in the patented Mighty Trigon, which is so cool because it is a smaller ring. So you know that the fighters have to come and they have to bring it.
Yeah, they move into the action instead of avoiding it, because if you take you can take one step to the back and one or two to the side, but you can't take two back or you're going to end up in one of the tight corners. So it's actually 3 equal 21-foot sides. It's not that it's smaller. I mean, it is smaller in square footage, but it's just less area to work with, more angles to think about, and it's the third man in the ring. So you want to take your action to your opponent and try to get it out of there as fast as possible.
And Mike, did this all originate in South Florida with backyard fighting legend Dada 5000?
Absolutely. I met Dada back in 2014 when he was literally had stopped the backyard fights because the state of Florida and the boxing commission was, after years of, not allowing it, but I guess looking the other way, they needed to step in. So once that happened, that he wasn't doing any more fights, we met through my partner, Jose Suris, and he knew that I had experience with NASCAR and NASCAR Mexico and creation of a sports series, and asked me if I would look into that, and I did. I thought it was a diamond in the rough. I thought the action was great. I thought it was really gritty. I thought it was the next evolution of combat sports, is actually going back to its roots. And I just said, I just need to meet Dada. If we're going to do something, I need to meet the man and see how compatible we are. And I did, and I got to tell you, I was extremely impressed with Dada. Extremely intelligent, extremely motivated. And he's been a great partner over the last couple of years, and I think our results have shown, event after event, we've improved the whole production.
And when you think of combat sports, and even thinking about the backyard brawls, the backyard fighting, you think of Dada 5000, you also think of Kimbo Slice. And you mentioned the intelligence of Dada 5000, and that's something that I found too. The fighters, they're not just gladiators, warriors, but whether it's a Dada 5000 or the late Kimbo Slice, very intelligent, very smart business people as well.
Yeah, I got to say, without Kimbo Slice paving the way would have been very difficult, even for Dada and anybody else. But those videos, they went viral. Timing is everything, and that was fantastic. And of course, the Dada and the Kimbo fight that was featured on Bellator a few years ago, that made incredible ratings numbers for Bellator. It was a record show for them. And the dogfight movie about Dada, that actually is going to have a dogfight round 2 is going to be released next year, produced by Billy Corbin. So we're looking forward to that as well.
And there's another fighter from Miami, Jorge Masvidal, now doing great things with UFC. It just lends itself, Mike, to what that was and what it has become, especially in bare knuckle fighting. You said that's the next step in this evolution. Just how do you see promoting it? How do you see getting it out there to the fans? Because this is something that's been around, but now it's becoming more mainstream, it seems, these days.
the challenge, you think bare knuckle, and then instantly you think, oh, it's gruesome, it's worse, it's barbaric. But in reality, the glove was invented to protect the hand, so it can hit the head harder and more often. The glove wasn't invented to protect your head. So bare knuckle fighting, the fights are usually shorter. The punches are thrown with more accuracy and less wild punches, and the fights are shorter. So fighters take less damage, concussive damage, and that's been proven in several studies, including the British Medical Association, and there's a doctor that's been following the bare knuckle fights. Now, we are less likely to have injuries than boxing and MMA. The only thing, we're more likely to have laceration, like cuts, but less concussive and even less broken hands, believe it or not. So that's our point, is not only are we not more dangerous than, boxing or MMA, where they allow elbows, knees, and kicks to the head, but we're actually proving ourselves to be a safer form, quicker fight that ends in quick knockouts and excite the fan base, instead of long, drawn-out fights where fighters will take more punishment over the course of 10 or 12 rounds or 25 minutes of MMA.
That's very interesting, because I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you did, because yes, these fights are shorter, so you do less damage, but they're so action-packed, they're so quick. I remember Yuli Monster Diaz in an event, and he's another Miamian, and just like, boom, blink your eye, you missed it, he knocked the guy out. It's just, the action is a lot of action in a short period of time, and you can end up not doing as much damage to somebody, because like you said, some of those fights in the other combat sports go on longer and longer.
Absolutely. The fights are shorter. In today's day and age, where people's attention span is what it is. I equated back to my time in NASCAR, where I could sit down and watch the Daytona 500 from beginning to end, or the Coca-Cola 600. And now I can't see 20 laps without looking at my phone, checking my email, or our attention span has been greatly reduced. So I think it's a sign of the times. Great timing.
Yes, it is, and that's the one thing. We don't have to go into other sports all totally, but baseball has hit a wall because it's so long. The game's long, and they're doing what they can to make it shorter, because they know, like you said, this generation, you want to see things quicker. You want to see things right now and get them done. So I think your action, what you're doing here at BYB is amazing. It's interesting, and it just delves into this generation. And hey, you got Nelson involved, and I'm wondering how, Nelson, you can jump in on this too. How did you get involved with BYB?
Through Mike, literally, who called almost 2 years ago, very near 2 years ago, and asked if I'd want to get involved in the television production of the sport, and came down to Miami to visit, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Well, Nelson, your background is so extensive, and you've done so much in the TV world. It's just amazing. And I want to delve, obviously, back to the WrestleMania WWF days. But I also want to get your thoughts of what you see as BYB and putting it out there, getting it to the mainstream. And from your standpoint and what you're knowledgeable at, what does it take to get this thing off the ground and moving on a TV production standpoint?
Mike hit it on the nose with the fact that the timing of the event is all important here, and the fact that we've got events that typically run somewhere between 3 to 4, possibly 5 rounds, a round being the actual 3 minutes, is helpful nowadays. It keeps your attention, and it generally almost never winds up as a match that needs to be decided by refs and so forth, or judges. It winds up with a conclusive end to it. And audiences love that from their standpoint. It is not something that's left in the hands of a third party, so to speak. That's very important for viewers, that it has a conclusive end to the fight which they like.
So many times we see in boxing, we see in MMA, we see in other combat sports when it does go to the judges, and sometimes we scratch our head at what the judges, how different the scoring is for each judge, and then sometimes even the decisions themselves. So this lends itself to what both of you are saying, that look, these fights are going to be quick, they're going to be over, and we're going to find out who really wins. Mike?
Absolutely. I think it's the most purest form of combat sports. It happens since the second, they say the car racing happened when the second car was made. You know, fighting was invented the second as the second man was made. You know, so literally, or the third in the case of Cain and Abel, I guess. But you know, it does provide the action, the resolution, and very little controversy. We saw it this last week with the AJ fight, where, you know, one official apparently, or one referee, there's calls in the sport to ban him from being a judge ever again. You know, so we try to keep it out of the judges' hands and let the fighters resolve it. And most of our fights will end in the second or the third round, but we do have a 5-round maximum, and our championship fights go to 7. So that's usually the way it ends.
Now, Nelson, why don't we revert back to the time of WWF? That's what it was then. Now we know it as WWE, and the early goings of WrestleMania. And wow, you were just a key component in the TV and that side of the industry for the company. And I'm curious first, what was it like being part of a business, of a company that, wow, now it's a $5 billion corporation?
It wasn't then. The nice thing and the fun thing about those years was that we were in an evolving state of affairs. We're talking now the early 1980s, when this really began to catch on, more than just the classic wrestling fans, to make it much more a broad appeal. During those days, in the early 1980s, we were experimenting with a lot of aspects of the television production. The wrestling itself got to be much more, dare I say, theatrical. Can I say that? I guess I can.
You did, and you can.
With characters being created primarily by Vince, although there were staff members like Pat Patterson and others who were a part of that evolvement. It was a time when very few folks would say, no, you can't do that. There was a lot of experimentation and trying new things to see if they worked for the TV networks and the executives at various networks, including USA and including NBC.
And when you talk about USA Network and NBC, we look at something like Tuesday Night Titans, and of course the very popular Saturday Night's Main Event, which I think was a catapult into growing the TV side of the company. What are your thoughts of the creation of Saturday Night's Main Event?
You have to give dual credit here, really, to Vince and Dick Ebersol. I don't know if that name is familiar to you.
Yeah, of course, a high NBC executive who made the decisions of what to put on TV, and they became good friends.
Yes. Dick was the head of NBC Sports. Also oversaw all of the shots of various sporting events, including, shall I say, the Olympics. Dick had the responsibility for a lot of the coverage of NBC Sports in those days. So it was a time of, with Saturday night's main event on NBC, it was a time of let's try new things, let's see where this can go, and can we build a fan base properly so that it lasts a long time. The trick, I think, in wrestling is that since it's so locked into the fan base and who do you like, who do you don't like, that the goal is to get something that works as a continuum, so that it's not locked into a particular and only a particular wrestler that you love to watch. That you can actually get the fan base locked in to the events and not just a specific wrestler that you like to watch. So if you can do that, if you can lock it in, get the fan base really locked into the programming versus, I shouldn't say versus, but as well as individual fighters that you love to watch. That's the key to it, because that will give it longevity. Because fighters, I hate to say this, fighters come and go. They do in the wrestling world. Sometimes through injuries, sometimes through retirement. But if you can get the audience tied into the nature of the presentation, that helps.
Tying that all together, especially during that time, and when you talk about fans invested in cheering for someone, wow, you had Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania, running wild, and you had, as the antagonist, Hot Rod Roddy Piper. So for you, working in the TV production and getting that off the ground and trying to get it out there, when you look back at it, how important, and I know there were many important, Vince is creating the characters and the talent, it all starts with him, but how important was it to have a Hulk Hogan and a Roddy Piper being in the top mix of all this?
Yeah, it's their ability to encourage and develop their fan base. That's really critical to this. Roddy turned out to be a really interesting fellow because he understood all that, as well as Hulkster, that's for sure. But each of these guys had, as we say in the wrestling world, they had a gimmick. I hate to use that term, but it's the term in the business. Each of them had a gimmick that fans loved to watch, whether it was their style of working in the ring, whether it was their own characters that they had developed and encouraged the fan base. All of those, when you take a look at the business in those years, you have to answer the question, what is it about a particular wrestler that really attracts the fans and, more importantly, keeps the fans?
Nelson, also, to add to that, do you think that when you're trying to get this type of programming on USA Network, on NBC, and other companies, cable, free television, for you, did it make it easier to try to get it to these different TV networks because of then how popular it became? Or I'm just trying to ask this, was it getting it on TV first and then it becoming popular, or was it popular and then it was easier getting it on TV?
No, there was always a fan base for pro wrestling. Back, decades. That's not new. The thing that's new is the way the stories were being told. And whether the storylines, I should say, captivated an audience and created an audience that wanted to see the continuing episodes. One of the things I should say that's changed in the business is that the storylines that we see nowadays are much shorter in duration. How that's affected the popularity of the sport is difficult to say. By the look of their audiences on TV right now, it doesn't seem to have affected it in a negative way. But during the 80s and 90s, the popularity or the ability of a storyline to captivate an audience, so the audience really wanted to see, how did it turn out? What was the final episode of Hulk versus Andre, for example? How was that going to play out? It's a real grabber for audiences, and I think to some extent that has changed a bit because the development of storylines and so forth currently, I think, run much shorter. Storylines originally ran somewhere in the neighborhood of, believe it or not, several months. You'd have a particular competition, let's say Hulk Andre kind of match. You'd find that being stretched out for 2-3 months before you had a major pay-per-view and the resolution of that particular contest. The storylines nowadays are much shorter. How that's affected the industry, the business, you have to ask someone else, because I can't really speak accurately to that.
Well, I think one thing maybe we can all agree on, Mike, as well, in the fact that, because of what you and Mike said earlier, too, because nowadays we want everything now, quicker, shorter, and maybe back then people took more time, gradual time, so you could build that storyline for several months, where now everybody wants fast, fast, fast. Let's get it up. Yeah, we don't want to wait 7 months, 8 months to see that match. Let's get it now. Maybe that's part of it.
That's exactly right. And I remember growing up, exactly what Nelson said, a storyline on a show, on a TV show, it would be stretched over the course of the season. Did they hook up? Did they not? Did this happen? Did not? Nowadays, people want to go to Netflix and see all 10 episodes of a show, of a series, that they want to see them all in that same Sunday binge, or they want to see it, they don't want to see a show over 10 or 12 weeks. They want to see it all in one day or when it's, I think that our smart devices have changed the world in many positive ways, but I think in some ways it's taken our attention away from each other and from being able to enjoy things but hey, it is what it is.
Hey, you evolve with it, you grow with it. You adapt or get lapped. So with technology, with streaming, with all these different things available now, we're getting things quicker and in a shorter amount of time. And I want to get a couple more questions I'll throw out here, and then we'll wrap this up. I'm also curious, Nelson, about WrestleMania 3, Hulk Andre, huge. WrestleMania 1, a lot of celebrity involvement. Liberace, Billy Martin. You go down the list. During time, Regis Philbin's involved. You get so many, Muhammad Ali. You get so many celebrities involved in WrestleMania. It became a huge spectacle. But WrestleMania 3 was huge. But I'm going back to WrestleMania 1 and even 2, because Mr. T was involved as well with Hulk Hogan. And I'm curious, Nelson, how excited were you for WrestleMania 1? How nervous were you for WrestleMania 1? Could you even see like, well, we've got to hit with this big or this is not going to be good for the company?
I think there was some sense that this thing had to be a big-time success. Remember, WrestleMania 1 was at the Garden in New York, and it was heavily loaded with celebs. I think there probably was a sense within the company that we weren't sure just whether the wrestling all by itself would be sufficient to carry this thing to the buy rates and so forth that were needed, because it was an expensive production for the company, and that we need to bring in folks like Liberace and others that would ensure that audiences would look in to follow the show. Keep in mind that pay-per-view back in WrestleMania 1, I think was in 85. I think that sounds right. And the early WrestleManias were only partially normal pay-per-view. That is to say, folks at home watching the show. The majority of viewers were in theaters, movie theaters, for those early WrestleManias.
I remember WrestleMania 2 at 3 locations, and down here I would go to the James L. Knight Center in Miami, which is still there, by the way, and watching it via satellite for WrestleMania 2. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, well, you had movie theaters all over the country for WrestleMania 1, and it was really WrestleMania 1 and 2 that proved the validity of pay-per-view. Pay-per-view wasn't a given that, clearly this is the way we should do that. That wasn't the thinking in those years. The traditional approach that came out of boxing, folks watched professional boxing in the early days in theaters on pay-per-view. They weren't watching it at home. So the fact that Vince decided that the future of these events was going to be what we think of as traditional pay-per-view was an evolving concept, really. It wasn't until really WrestleMania 3, I think, that the theater presentations sort of faded away.
And with that, you could mention boxing, closed circuit television for the boxing, their own brand of pay-per-view. Yes, many years ago, but Vince took the whole thing to another level with you involved. And I wanted to close with this part of it because I thought this was interesting when I was reading about all this. And tell me if I have this right, that Vince and the company trying to get so much exposure for WrestleMania, trying to get it out there so people know about it, that actually was on TBS, which was Ted Turner's station, for maybe 7-8 months building up to WrestleMania, taking over that program, which was NWA based. And I'm wondering, and it only was there for the 8 months and then it went away. But I'm just curious, do you remember that time? Do you remember, I mean, when we think about it now, wow, WWF was actually on TBS, which we noted for World Championship Wrestling later on, and then also NWA prior and Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, I'm not. That's Ann Gunkel's promotion in Atlanta, based in Atlanta. That's the timeline on that is about right. It lasted about 7 months, where we were producing a TV show that aired on Turner in Ted's studios, old TV. What was it, Channel 17 or something that Ted had, based in Atlanta, and we were shooting with some of the Georgia Championship wrestlers and the WWF wrestlers in Ted's studio. A studio shoot, if you could imagine that nowadays.
Wow.
With maybe 75, 80 people in the audience, something like that. The concept was evolving again. I'm trying to remember whether that occurred before or after the first WrestleMania 1. I don't remember. I do remember flying down to Atlanta frequently to oversee those shows in Ted's TV studio in his station in Atlanta, because there wasn't much of a Turner network effect at that point in time. It was basically his operation, and as you said, it lasted somewhere around 6-7 months before Ted got into the business whole hog, as it were.
And see, that part of it is so interesting too, because then who knows what would have happened if WWF remained on TBS, the Superstation, and we didn't have what ended up being Monday Night Wars later, and just all the greatness for fans to watch and see. But I just thought that was such an interesting time, and you were part of all that, and going down there for those shows and getting those shows ready for TV. So I want to thank you both so much for the time. We've got this big event in Miami, BYB 11, the Brawl in Doral, Saturday, August 27th at Trump National in Miami, in Doral. That's going to be a huge event. And hey, Mike, I'll end it with you. Hey, were you a big pro wrestling fan growing up?
I sure was. I grew up here in Florida, so we had the Florida, wrestling and Solon Gray and Chief Wahoo McDaniels and all that. I sit and listen to Nelson about some of the old stories, Gorilla Monsoon and all the experience that he had, and I'm sure I only get the PG stories, of course, but I'm in awe of him, of all his accomplishments, and just very, very proud and happy that he took my call and he came down and met us and liked what he saw and agreed to join us and help us along our way, as he did with with the wrestling. So we're just really happy to have him with us.
Yeah, Nelson has done so much in the industry of pro wrestling and combat sports. It's kudos to him over the years, and getting involved now with BYB. This will be very interesting to see the growth and the expansion and all. And I hope, Mike, and I hope, Nelson, that we can do this again. I love talking about the bare knuckle fighting. I love talking about the pro wrestling. I have many more questions, but I will save them for another time.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time with us and your interest in what we got to say.
Good to talk with you.
Thank you.